Daniel, you worked on a world that is near and dear to a lot of people in this room. A lot of games that have to do with J.R. Tolkien.
Oh, I thought the Ghostbusters game.
Oh, sorry. That too. I think a lot of people like Ghostbusters as well. So how did you think about what the player would be doing in this world that is, for a lot of people, is very cherished?
That's another instance where the answer is more what they're not going to be doing. But first I want to answer his question.
Okay, good.
Because if you're going to pitch an idea, the most important rule is don't go in and tell them you're pitching, don't call it an idea. Because the publishers see ideas as a dime a dozen and not inherently protectable. So always make sure you say that you're pitching intellectual property. Okay, so so as Tolkien's world goes from an idea to intellectual property, the important thing is that a lot of the fans are very obsessed about getting all the technical details, the technical nuance of Tolkien's world consistent, and consistency is tremendously important in fantasy, more important than anywhere else, because in the real world, quote unquote. You can rely on the player's knowledge of the real world to fill in a huge number of gaps. In a fantasy world, you can't take anything for granted. So when you're going to bend the laws of reality, you have to do it in a way that's completely consistent, that's internally consistent, has internal cohesion, that has integrity to itself, that holds together. It's much more important in fantasy than anything else. It's like that Dylan song, to live outside the law, you must be honest. You absolutely have to hold to a much tighter set of rules if you're working in fantasy, I believe, and do what George Lucas called build an immaculate reality. You're building a world that feels absolutely real. This is why one of C-3PO's shins is silver instead of gold, which a lot of people who watch all the Star Wars movies never know, because when you go back and look at it again, one of his shins is silver, not gold, because at some point he had to be replaced. Well, Lucas never bothered to explain why this was, and it might not have even been his idea anyway, but he did tell his people that you have to build a world that looks like it works, like it actually does something, that if you look at any one thing, it will tell you a bunch of stories which you can fill in on your own. It's not just, there's an orc and that's what an orc looks like, and there's something about that orc that tells a story, that reveals something, that puts together this immaculate reality. So consistency is a very important thing in building fantasy, but much more important about my approach to Tolkien is to get at what Tolkien was getting at. Not just to make sure that we pronounce all the names right and all this stuff, because anybody who's read the books and can pay attention can do that. It's important to get at what Tolkien was getting at, what Tolkien understood, and find a way to put that in a game. That's infinitely more difficult, but much more rewarding anytime you do it right.
Yes, but how is the story developed in terms of the player experience?
Very carefully. What you have to do is you have to, in building out Lord of the Rings, you have to kind of say what it is you're not going to do. You're not going to be playing the Fellowship characters, but you can meet them and you can interact with them, and they can set you on the way, and
you probably can't kill them.
And you, yeah. Oh, oops! That little guy who turned invisible in the prancing pony. I actually dropped a fireball on him. No, yeah. Can you be just a little bit more specific in the question, and I'll try and give you a more specific answer.
Will they feel like part of the main story that they've read in the book?
Yeah, well, the idea is to feel important in the world, to feel like you have some relevance to what's going on in the world, and that you are tangentially related to the ring bear's quest, which is of course a huge secret. So there's a lot of, in what way do we get everybody involved in that? But yes, that storyline is tremendously important. So crossing the paths of it.
And yet you know the ending of the Lord of the Rings. So
right.
How do you make that?
Well, if you fail, Frodo fails in the world ends. Presumably your story is much more important to you once you're in the game necessarily than what Frodo is up to as he's trudging, because you're presumably having a lot more fun than once he hits Mordor.
So Jeff, I know you're a fan of story Bibles. What would you include in a story Bible for it to be useful when you're planning out your world?
I'll respond to that and pick up from what Dan's talking about, because it's really important. What Dan referred to when he said that he went after Tolkien, as far as trying to puzzle out how to approach a Lord of the Rings game, as opposed to the military campaign of Lord of the Rings, or the magic system of Lord of the Rings, and that sort of thing. That is vital, and one of the things that is going to make or break you as world designers and as storytellers in this medium is your ability to communicate something that is vital and important and central to you. What is your message? What is it that you want to say with this story world, with this property? And how are you going to filter that statement? Because often the statement is very simple. In Pirates of the Caribbean, that the statement that's made through the trilogy of Pirates of the Caribbean is that there is a balancing act that you have to perform between savagery and civilization, being kind of a conformist. And if you can find that tightrope line and get on it and walk through the middle of it, you can achieve a kind of state of bliss, so that nothing that happens to you, no matter how horrific or horrendous or bizarre, you'll forge through, because you've found your bliss. You're in that center, and that is Jack Sparrow. That is that character moving through this insanity, and that's a great statement. But what makes it even greater is that it was filtered through the experiences of this core group of creative people, this visionary group, from Gore Verbinski down through Ted and Terry, the screenwriters, and Johnny Depp. You need to find a statement to make for yourself that's important and vital to you, and filter your own experience into this fantasy world, and then carry it off and acknowledge the fact that everything around that is malleable, can change, can be impacted by budget, by somebody else's creativity, by a graphic designer, and so forth. Just don't let them compromise that core message, and if it remains intact, it will cause your work to resonate, and that's what's really important. That's why Starlight Runner has become known for its Bibles. We call them mythologies, and whenever we take on a new project, we get that message down. If we're working with a client, say Mattel and Hot Wheels, we go, what is the core essence of the Hot Wheels brand? They go speed, power, performance, and attitude. And we go, okay, those are four essential things that need to go into this video game, into this animated show, into the action figures and what have you. We're going to add a fifth one because we're Starlight Runner. And that's teamwork, which is odd for a race car game. But we're going to throw it in there and see what happens. And then we build a Bible that is fractally moving out from that core essence, that core message, and that dictates the kind of characters you're inventing, the kind of non-player characters you're inventing, and everything about the world speaks to that specific subject. When you think of Star Wars, when you think of all the great fantasy works, you will know that it's always about basically one core message that resonates with all of us forever.